People refer to classical music as a genre when it's a style. You have Baroque, before that Renaissance, after Baroque classical, after which you have Romantic, after which you have modern, after which you have contemporary, from the Latin contemporis, which means at the same time, therefore living. And before Renaissance, you have medieval. Through all these general time periods that encompass at least a century each, some more, some less, innovation in instruments, innovation in acoustics, in terms of how music is spread, taught, shared, dispersed, remembered, notated, individually or in group, chamber or orchestra, ensemble or soloist, singer with text in language connected to a culture and therefore a tradition, and music without text that are pieces that are structures, formal ones like sonatas, fugues, preludes, chaconnes, or generally dance, song, theater form of music that is played on an instrument or with other instruments. And generally today people refer to every piece as a song, even if it's instrumental, to every style as classical because it's the genre versus pop. But within pop you have so many genres and styles, and synth pop as well. But the general education about classical music as a language, aesthetically, is not connected to everyday's life of young generations unless they're involved in making it, studying it, and learning it. But if they're not, it's entertainment, not necessarily, but sometimes Sunday music for worship, if they do go to such situations where they are exposed to it. And then the awareness of the styles comes if they have educated and cultivated parents or elders who bring them to performances, live performances, opera, ballet, string quartet concerts. In other words, areas of music sharing where the audience is knowledgeable enough to be involved, but not necessarily as a performer level, but with a concentration capacity that is way longer than a 3-minute entertaining song with a ritornello form, ABACA. And that usually it's a barrier for most people who think it's not for them. It's like, this book is too boring. Might I just read it in the form of a cartoon? And that's fine too, because it brings an awareness through a different media. But fact is that classical music is not only classical. As a matter of fact, with the music of today, contemporary music, we are outside of tonality for some, if not most. In the 20th century, in the reorganization of the order of the tones with the serial movement. And before that, you had modal, chromatic, tonal combinations and percentages of, which mark the signature of languages of composers you can recognize by their usage of a specific interval. more than the others, though it's communal to most, but that makes them recognizable stylistically. Debussy with a whole tone scale, Chopin with the chromaticism, dramatic in minor, Liszt with the octaves in minor, Rachmaninoff with the chords in minor, the cascades of virtuosity which evolved from polyphony of vocal style from Renaissance to write in 40 parts a specific motet, or to play a very complex piece where many notes are played at the same time on the same instrument in the 19th into 20th century, Paganini on the violin and Liszt on the piano. But the world of classical music is so incredibly rich because it brings you solace through sacred music and hope. It brings you reflection and time traveling through quartets, especially string quartets, but also woodwind quintets, or piano chamber music with strings or winds, or then poems set in art songs, sang and narrated, therefore, by the singer with the pianist as orchestra, as the melodies in the right hand of a pianist with the left hand as an accompaniment. Alberti bass for the early classical Haydn Mozart compared to the Bach Handel. That was more basso continuo motion of bass movement that flows forward with decorations on top and ornamentations, when the Romantic era in the 19th century was the melodic line that is accompanied by a harmony. So it's the direction of the music spans from going down, up to up, down in its structure and construction, and also in its spreading and its emotional combination of emotional contrasts, where you didn't have only single style movements like Baroque dances in a suite or a sonata form with contrasting themes, remains in the same mood. Whenever in the Sturm und Drang, German Romanticism, and forward in Middle Europe, west into east, you have so much contrasting expectations that come as a surprise, but in a way they're supposed to combine drama with comedy and give you dramedy and narrate emotionally more than structurally and formally the statement that the music produces with or without words. When it's an opera and it's sang, or a ballet and it's danced and not sang, or just instrumental, it's played nor sang nor danced, you can find communalities in the expression with intervals that are expressive psychologically of emotions, rising, dropping, inching or jumping, big leaps, major, minor combined, or halfway each, minor, major. So there are so many subtle ways through times where each individual composer expressed themselves with the tools of what they received in their time period in which they were born, and area as well, before they were able to travel much, and there was little libraries with a lot of music to study, and life was short too. So in a way, the music of the past, of the different styles that I enumerated earlier in this video, they were just ignoring most of the music of their past because they had to quickly make a living from the music of their day. And so, in fact, all the music of the different styles of the past are studied detailedly in music schools today worldwide, in music history, in musicology, in performance practice, in different combinations of chamber music or ballet opera or whichever ensemble, or film music or game music or commercial music. All these are produced from the fact that there is an environment that immediately signals the music you hear, from which time period it comes, without to be an erudite musician yourself. You recognize the musical signature of a time period, like the Alberti bass, or in Chopin, or in Rachmaninoff, or in Liszt. Of course, in Debussy would be. But once you say that, you say nothing subtle. You just say some generalities. Because yes, they're recognizable, but at the same time they're reductive. The pentatonic music reminds us of music of Asia. The augmented second music reminds us musically, melodically, not harmonically, of music from the Middle East. But okay, these are facts. Within all that, you have so much more subtle variations of the language. If you use something that is tonal or modal, the mode is a flat 7 or sharp 7 for the leading tone. When Albéniz writes Triana, he uses the melodic descending of the modal, and then when he drops, he goes to the leading tone. So it's not, nor. So composers choose the subtle levels of innuendos through the colorization of their harmonies and tonalities, and the choice of tonality as well, while they are transposed equally after the equal temperament that came up to be when Zilberman, Bach's organ builder, established the unison octave. So you could play on the same keyboard in every key. Before you couldn't, because it was tuned by major thirds, which were above the octave. So it created a mean tone tuning that the intonation came from the tuning styles, and the harpsichords had a specific expression for that. Through which, if you chose a tonality, you chose a tonality which, when not tuned into it to be played at, created a dissonance, which was then a color, an interpretation to describe musically through the notes and without text, pain or drama, things that inevitably evolve because the audacity and modernity of a given time period escapes us after, when we don't have the map to read it through the awareness of how it used to be played. Today we have copies of instruments of the past and music schools where they teach us how to play the way it used to be played, while at the same time we play the music of the past on modern instruments like this piano, for which this music of the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century were not written for, but played on. And so how do you differentiate the style between Chopin and a Bach? In both cases, the right hand sings, the left hand accompanies, but century apart. And how much has gone in between in the development not only of the instruments but of the social order or the church, Western European Catholicism, and then split with the earlier then with Protestantism and secular music compared to sacred music and chamber music because of the patrons who could afford to have live music in their court or homes or mansions. In other words, before music was recorded and captured and distributed through recordings, it had to be produced alive, and composers composed a lot of music that was daily consumption. And so inevitably, stylistically, there were things that were standardized, but with a customization for some aspects of the tonal system that was close to the need of expression of a given composer's either a background of which country they come and what kind of popular songs or nursery songs were in their childhood. Like Chopin with the mazurkas, Liszt with the Hungarian rhapsodies, Albéniz with Iberia, which means Spain, and so many composers who inspired themselves for their musical expression through their background, and others who constructed inner world universes out of their own imagination, abstractly, so to say, disconnected from a specific tradition. And that's Fauré, Schoenberg, many of these composers who rethought the musical language. Not necessarily only the alphabet, but the equivalent of very eloquent way of organizing your sentence. So beyond grammar for a language like music is, inevitably, beyond the rules, because you learn it by ear, but you develop it by reading and writing, just like you do with the language, even without becoming a writer per se. But you have the tools to think by your own and express your thoughts if you can, wish and do. And therefore, the syntax of a given composer within the same time period, like, I don't know, Schumann, Chopin, Mendelssohn, and Liszt lived in the same time period, the early Romantic era, and they each composed music that expressed a lot of their emotional beings. And they're very different from each other while sharing the same communal area, time period. And same about the Baroque with Bach and Scarlatti and Handel, and between the Haydn, Mozart, Hummel in the early classical, or the Scriabin, Rachmaninoff after Tchaikovsky and before others in the Russian late Romanticism. And the French composers, Debussy, Ravel, Fauré, and so many more, while in the Impressionist period of the painters, not in music, symbolism for poets, were very individualistic in their expression, and it's difficult to compare them other than that they were individuals who shared in common one language, French, just like Schumann and the other Germanic raised composers used German, or the Russians Russian. And I think in many aspects the intellect through the language develops a specific way of thinking the music that they express, even if it's shared in the tonal system that is common to all, or then that they adapt according to their own personality. It's almost as if it's a translation of their soul's inner world. And for us professional musicians, we have to make sure that when we play on a modern piano, different centuries and styles, you can hear not only the pieces and their notes and their rest and the rhythms and the patterns and whatever it's on the score, because that's what we learn to do best. And then also we express through their music their civilization, their way of thinking death, hope, love, how were the theater plays and the fiction novels of their time and the operas that were famous during their time, and how it shaped through their faith or through their political engagement if they were in countries that were at war, how the music became an expression of their identity, as Tchaikovsky with the 1812 overture with the Napoleonic Wars. You cannot take out of context nor explain all because of the context, but it is part of what they've done. You cannot take them out of it entirely and just isolate them away from what made them be who they were when they were. So to understand them, we study them, we explore them, we analyze them, we compare them, we read articles about them, we write books about them, not only biographically, but also mostly about their works, their body of work, their essential contribution to the classical music in general through their genres: ballet, opera, quartet, sacred music, solo, chamber music, song, in individual or in group, or choir, or opera with storytelling. I find it fantastic to be able to time explore other time periods than ours today, where we have access so much more easily digitally or in books, through libraries, to so much more of their writings than they themselves had for their predecessors, or the time to. To a certain extent, it probably overtakes the creativity of today's musicians, because today's music is taught separately to play, separately to think, separately to compose, separately to compare, separately to organize, separately to conduct, separately to manage, separately to consider what type of music we will do, in how we want it to be dispersed through which channel, towards which audience, and how we can reach the biggest number with what we believe is meaningful and beautiful to make them discover. So there are elements of music that cannot be individually separated in lanes, but today they are mostly, and therefore in the past the performers or composers who were also music thinkers, not necessarily all of them wrote treatises, but many did. So it is a fantastic wealth for us today of infinity almost, that we'll never have enough of our lifetime to explore each of the marvels that they all left us, which they didn't leave us. We are appropriating them for what it means to us to perform for audiences, to teach to students, to compete with at competitions, to compare in juries, to admit for teaching when we hire teachers, to prolong the whole tradition of awareness, knowledge, culture, besides talent, drive, and spontaneous musical love. And combine that all in a way that it's meaningful to each culture or different student who comes from so many different parts of the world before. Less, today more. Classical music has spread all over the globe compared to just mostly, let's say, Western Europe 3 or 2 centuries ago. It's humbling, and it's at the same time a big responsibility when you teach. It's selflessness, it's humility, and curiosity, and a sense of always discovering more than what we think we know at all ages and seasons of life. Thank you.